Hello, everyone. So today I'm going to do a short little video looking at something that has just been released by Braxton on his channel entitled Why Atheists Talk Like This. And in this video, he responds to a few different atheists as they make varying remarks about various things. So I think we've got comments by David Hume, Dan Barker, Sean Carroll, and Matt Delahunty talking about different topics relating to free will and morality and so forth. So I'm not going to go through every point that's raised here, but there were a few issues that I wanted to discuss here, and I guess I was sort of a bit put off by the tone and I guess styling of this video, so I felt prompted to produce a response. So I'm just going to skip around a bit in the video and respond to bits and pieces here and there. So let's make a start and start with Braxton's response to David Hume's bundle theory of the self. I've skipped the part where they show a little clip from that, so I just want to hear some of what Braxton has to say about it.
With Hume is so he would ask you to think about when you're angry. Do you have an impression of yourself and that you're angry, or do you just have an impression of anger? When you're in pain, do you have an impression of yourself being in pain, or do you have an impression of pain? And what he wants to point out is there is no impression, there is no access you have to this other substance, self. All you have access to are the impressions. And so as a result of that, you are a bundle of impressions. A way of thinking about this might be like an orchestra, so that there's individual little things going on. You could live without any one of them. You could add other ones to it, but they create something that seems unified in that way. But the idea is that you are a bundle of impressions. But this means that not only are you not the same self that you were 10 years ago.
There's no self to have.
There's no self
to be the same over time.
And one of the lines that comes up a lot with people when they're first realizing this is to say, listen, any worldview that requires you to conclude that you don't exist is probably one you should avoid. Now that's putting it too simplistically, but the point is, this is a really problematic view. I mean, think about what this means. If you accept this, and you conclude that this is true, how can you conclude that what we're saying concluded this was true was a bundle of impressions?
And well, one impression of the bundle, even. Yeah. Bundle theory is a mess, and it's been rightly discarded. But yeah, I mean, it's got contemporary champions, similar self-deniers like Alex Rosenberg, for example, is a contemporary philosopher who rejects.
Yeah, William Lane Craig asked him, "Who wrote your book?"
Right.
Yeah. Right. And if no one, then why should I take it seriously?
Right.
But
and he also asserted that none of the words in his book even have any real meaning.
Yeah. So this is.
Okay, so they go on about Alex Rosenberg, and I don't have any particular desire to defend him, but this idea that if the bundle theory of self is correct, then somehow we don't exist, or there's no sense in which we can be said to write books or persist over time. This is a strange inference, right? Because the bundle theory of self is supposed to be a theory of what the self is, in particular that there's no substance that makes us a self that persists over time, but rather we are a bundle of perceptions and thoughts and so forth. And there's different models for how this might persist over time. So I've discussed in previous videos that I've done with digital gnosis about different possibilities. So Purdurantism says that humans or people are four-dimensionally extended objects, and so the sense in which we persist over time is the same sense in which a spatially extended object has spatial parts. Humans and probably other animals and so forth have temporal parts as well. A different response would be to say that humans, that the continuity of self is grounded in psychological continuity over time of different states. There are other possibilities as well that one might one might describe, just depending on exactly how you want to ground the notion of persistence, like what is it that persists. So this is widely discussed in the philosophical literature, the idea that you just sort of don't have a self if you don't believe in some sort of immaterial substance that persists over time, I think is very strange. And I would sort of like to know why Braxton jumps from one to the other. It's as if that no atheists have thought about this, or that no one's written about this since David Hume. And I mean, I think what David Hume has to say is more substantial than they're giving credit for. But even then, why do we just sort of stop at Hume and pretend like no one's written about this? I think it's quite odd. And maybe Braxton, let's have a conversation about how atheists understand or how naturalists understand the persistence of self over time.
Is one thing, and it does go along with this whole idea that if you're, well, in this case an empiricist, but specifically if you're a materialist or a physicalist, as a Christian or not as a Christian, one of the things, and if you've listened to this channel for long, you've heard us cover it before, but if naturalism is true, and I should be clear, there are unbelievers for sure, and there are even atheists who are not naturalists, but if you are a naturalist, then that means that there isn't this other substance, this other and by substance we don't mean a natural substance. We mean it can be material or immaterial, but this other substance that that is your soul or your mind, kind of a Cartesian sort of way, that is there. And so you are whatever you are at one particular time. And so if you go back 10 years, it's a different arrangement of not just of physical matter, but also of impressions, different impressions. And so one of the things that often gets brought up, and we talked about on the show, is one of the ways that philosophers have thought about this is to think about, and this is in Plutarch, the ship of Theseus, where Theseus has to go and fight the Minotaur, and the guy who owns the place where the Minotaur is, his daughter helps Theseus get out, and he has to save these kids and all this whole thing. But he comes back on a ship, and they celebrate, and they save his ship. And over a period of time, every part of the ship is replaced over a period of years. So then the question is that still Theseus's ship? Or is it not Theseus' ship? Because none of the same material that was there before is there now. It's completely replaced. Or as I did in my discussion with Chris Day, so look, what if you have an axe that just has two parts, the axe head and the axe handle, and the head has been changed 3 times and the handle's been changed 5 times? Is that the same axe? Now, to me, and philosophers do debate this, but to me, my intuitions tell me, and I don't think just my intuition, my logic tells me, that is not the same axe. But physicalists, including Chris Day, will say, no, if we can guarantee that there was someone there who was with it the whole time through all the changes, it's still the same axe. So you can listen to our discussion on that for a more robust defense of that from Chris Day. But the fact is, I think that falls out. And when we look at the idea that you are...
So I have a question for Braxton and those who agree with him. So the axe is a bit of a simple case, but maybe let's think about a car. So if I have a car that I've driven for decades, maybe I inherited it. It's a very old car, right? Let's suppose that actually every individual atom in that car has been changed out since the original car. Maybe all of the different parts have been replaced at different times. And even within those parts, there's exchange of atoms with the environment. So let's just suppose that all of the individual parts have been changed over the decades, and also the atoms, within those parts have changed. Just as a sort of a thought experiment. Would Braxton say that's the same car? It seems that he's committed to saying that's not the same car, but then it seems we have an issue here because, most people, I think, well, at least I don't know what they would say if they were asked to philosophically reflect on it, but like legally, that's still my car, right? And it's still the same car that I inherited. And it still, appears similar. It, has many of the same properties that the original car did. There's a continuity over time of that car and its function and so forth. And so for many intents and purposes, we would say that, this is the same car. But Braxton seems to have to deny that unless he wants to admit that there's some sort of non-physical aspect to cars or something like that. We could likewise run a similar argument for animals or trees or other things like this that are not human persons, but are composed of parts and we would generally think persist over time. So the question is, how does Braxton understand the persistence of these objects or complex entities over time? See, I would say that we need a similar theory to which we would give for the persistence of self over time, maybe some sort of bundle theory, maybe a psychological or biological or otherwise continuity, or perhaps identity relations is not the right one. We have to look at similarity relations or something like that. There's different possible options here. Perdurantism would be another one. But it seems that Braxton is only thinking about humans and doesn't have anything to appeal to, any apparatus to appeal to understand how this same problem applies to other living entities or non-living entities as well. So that would be my question for Braxton. How do you understand the persistence over time of these other sort of complex entities? Do they all have some sort of immaterial substance that grounds their persistence over time, or do none of these things actually persist over time? And then the whole same set of strange intuitions and counterintuitive consequences that Braxton wants to use against the atheists for ourselves persisting over time is going to apply to these things as well. So I don't actually think that the view that Braxton's appealing to here really makes a whole lot of sense, at least insofar as he's defended it.
Are just a physical body. Then we have this problem that even atheistic philosophers talk about, which is, how is it that not only are you a self, but how is it that there is something unchanged? Because to be a self means we're talking about something that doesn't change over time, that doesn't change such that it's not what it is. And so how do you anchor personal identity? Some people try to do it with neurons firing and things like that. But again, every cell in your body just about cycles out or changes. Maybe you can anchor it in memories, but that doesn't work because I don't have any memories from before I was, let's say, 4 years old. Does that mean I'm a different person than I was before I was 4 years old? And some people latch onto that and say, well, yes, of course you're a different person. Well, but we mean that poetically. Jonathan, since he's lost all this weight, is a different person than he was before, but he's still the same personal identity.
Yeah, this just sort of goes on and it's more of the same thing. But again, it seems that we do change a lot over time. So actually saying that I'm identically the same as the person I was, when I was 2 months old, seems a bit strange to me. It seems that there's a continuity there, but whether its identity is not so clear to me. Also, we want to push this back and say, well, when did I cease to be identical to myself? Is it before birth? At what point from the fetus to the embryo? Does it go all the way back to the zygote? Do you really want to say that I'm identical to the zygote that formed that later developed to me. That actually seems rather an odd claim to me. I'm not sure if that's exactly what Braxton would say, but that's a question I would ask. Do we affirm that we are identical to the zygotes that developed into us? To me, again, that seems quite counterintuitive, and I think a continuity or temporal parts notion makes more sense to me. And so again, I think that this problem that he's putting on the naturalist actually is really no more or less of a problem for him than it is for anyone else. And the sort of proposed solutions that sort of fall out of theism are really not very good solutions if you actually think about them. So I'm going to skip forward a bit because I think that I've sort of done that question as much as I want to. Now, I think the next one, I don't actually remember what this one was about. As I said, I will be skipping around a little bit. They discuss, the whole thing about like who is an atheist and are rocks atheist. I just, that question is so boring to me. Let's talk about worldviews and just forget about labels. So I'm just going to skip past that and go to what Dan Barker has to say. I think about free will here. So actually, I'm interested in what Braxton says about what Barker says. So let's just skip a little bit forward and play this bit.
So
back a little bit. This means it's not a lie, and maybe it's a pretense. But what's wrong with pretending it because it does work? There's no harm in us agreeing about the value of things.
Is there not something that's a great pity?
So again, for those of you that might be just showing up, we're not here just to make fun of atheists with this or unbelievers.
We haven't made fun of anybody.
The idea is to show that when you accept atheism or when you subtract theism from a worldview, I understand that atheism is not a worldview, but when you subtract theism from a worldview, and especially if you go with a naturalism or a materialism.
So I'm a reductive naturalist, for those who may not know. So again, I'm happy to defend that as a worldview. That's why the whole lack theist or who has a burden of proof discussion is very uninteresting to me. Let's put our worldviews out there and compare them using arguments and evidence. So that's what I'm interested in doing here.
Then there are things that shake out that seem to square poorly with at least our intuitive understanding of reality and our intuitions about the things that we hold most dear. What I love about this clip is that Dan Barker says, I think free will is one of the most meaningful things about being a human being. If he didn't say that exactly there, he does say something. He tries to get it out. I think he misspoke, but he says it in his book. Okay, it's one of the most meaningful things about being a human, but we're pretending. And he says, okay, we're pretending, but what's wrong with that? Well, it's consistent to say we're pretending. I appreciate that he's consistent on that. But think about what that means. You're saying it's one of the most meaningful things about being human, and it's not real. It's just pretend. And that's why it did occur to me to say in that moment, and I'm glad I did that. So it's not true, but you're pretending that it is true because it makes you feel good. That sounds like what atheists accuse Christians of. And I think that that's a valid point. Now, back on the atheism thing, I know we're going to get to questions in a minute, but I'm so pleased to see that Real Atheology has showed up in the chat here and says, I completely agree that atheism is...
don't care about this point. Can we just skip, please? Maybe I'll do a whole video on that at some point because there's some issues there, but
I almost cried.
Yeah.
That was
boring.
Misunderstand. That desk. And Rodney, that is such a...
Yes, you should know.
Oh, they're still on that. Don't care.
You are so dumb.
It's like we can't have anything anymore. Mr. Bill, like that because it's not like baseball, right? Because baseball is something that was...
Okay, so they're talking about free will again, and they're using the example of baseball as a sort of a human construct that nevertheless sort of has its own objective rules within the context of the game. So let's see what they say about that.
Something we can trace its history cobbled together. It's relative insofar as the universe is concerned, but it is objective insofar as within baseball you have to follow these rules, right? Mm-hmm. That's not like I can either pick this up or not pick this up. Mm-hmm. It's not the same kind of thing. And it's not that we're all pretending to have a social convention of I could have or couldn't have, but we all really know that we couldn't have. Because number one, we don't all know that or agree with that. But when you play baseball, you're agreeing to a set of rules, right? To play the game in a certain way. We're not agreeing that we know that this is fake, but we're going to pretend like we have choices. Because that's not how most people experience their volition capacities.
Right.
So
Brando says they changed their minds about this. They had too much pushback. Well, that's good to hear.
Good.
And True ID says, True ID Apologetic says, thank you for your clarification on the word woke. Or knows that term is so often misapplied. Right. So you're right. And actually later in the debate, and I encourage you to watch that debate with me and Dave Barker. But that's one of the things that comes out is like he says, it's like we say things like this that aren't true, like the sun came up, And what I told him was, but as the stakes get higher with what we're talking about, we don't talk that way. For instance, we talk about the sun coming up. But if you work for NASA and you're a part of a mission to Mars, you sure better speak with precision and clarity about planetary orbits and things like that, right? That's not and same way with like in terms of what we have an intuition about. If a man is on a desert island, then he won't have any intuitions about chess or baseball, but he will have an intuition that I didn't have to do the thing I just did. Yeah. And that's an important distinction as well.
Right. So this is become
the place that Braxton gives in his, I guess, epistemology or worldview for intuitions is really surprising to me. They mention this a little bit more later, but I mean, I'm not entirely sure exactly what intuitions people on desert islands have about free will, although it seems that a lot of people do have some sort of libertarian-ish idea about free will. But so maybe he's right that most people do have that intuition, but I'd still like to actually see some research on that. But putting that to the side, what relevance does that have for anything? I mean, lots of things are not how they seem to be intuitively. In fact, I would say the majority of things are not how they appear to be intuitively. Our intuition only is reliable when it comes to things that we directly interact with regularly. So we're pretty good in a lot of sort of social situations with medium-sized objects at medium speeds in the sense that we interact with them. So, you know, we can tell what's, in a lot of cases, at least, what's poisonous or what's good for us to eat. We've developed to be able to do that. You know, we're good at sort of catching objects moving quickly in the corner of our eyes, and we sort of turn and perceive that. You know, things like that. We're pretty good at determining that. But when it comes to working out, like, could I done otherwise in an ultimate ontological kind of sense, how on earth are we supposed to know that? You can't just sort of look inside you and figure that out. I mean, I guess Braxton does think that you can do that, but I guess I would like to know how you determine that. It's really hard for me to understand. I mean, you know, Braxton thinks it's absurd that the atheists will deny libertarian free will, as I do deny libertarian free will. I'm a compatibilist about free will, but Braxton doesn't seem to think that that counts as like real free will. So, okay, whatever. Let's talk about libertarian free will with the freedom to do otherwise. I mean, why think that we have this? It's just, well, intuitively, it seems to Braxton and other people that we do. That's a really weak argument from my point of view. And as a truth seeker, someone who, you know, wants to find out whether we do have libertarian free will, among other things, you know, we want to bring to bear the best evidence and reasons that we can. And the idea that, well, we just sort of, you just think about it on a desert island and you just sort of know that you have it. Is that really what we're going to be satisfied with? So my question to Braxton here would be, why should I be satisfied with that as a sort of determining or critical aspect of answering these sorts of questions? Because it seems to me we have extremely good reasons to think that that's not going to be a very reliable method, ranging from the fact that intuitions vary wildly between people to the fact that it's not clear why that intuition would have any connection to the truth of the matter. Through we have a huge history of cases where our intuition has been wildly wrong about all sorts of things, from science and other matters. So, someone in the chat, by the way, is saying compatibilists can accept the principle of alternate possibilities, or the ability to do otherwise. That is true, and it does depend on the type of compatibilist you are. I personally don't accept the principle of alternate possibilities or freedom to do otherwise, but maintain free will. And I think that that's the mainline compatibilist position, for what I understand. But I mean, you know, you can believe whatever you want. But but there are some compatibilists who try to make it compatible with principle of alternate possibilities. But anyway, that's a discussion for another time. I'm just responding to what Braxton's talking about here, and particularly the idea that our intuition is sort of somehow a beacon of sort of truth when it comes to knowing whether we could have done otherwise. And I just don't see why we should think that.
Becoming a common trend, and we've got to push back on it as Christians, because it has become so. It's almost a throwaway line now. Well, I mean, we know that not everything is what it seems to be, or what we. No, that's not true. Braxton's wearing a black shirt. I'm wearing a maroon suit. I'm wearing reader glasses. It's exactly what you think it is. And this idea that it's become so fashionable just to foul off ideas we don't like, free will, you know, the beginning of a cosmos, whatever. Well, you know, design, telos in living creatures and in the cosmos. Well, it's not, things aren't what they are. For the most part, they are. This is just nonsense sophistry that people get into with this kind of. And yeah, I'm going to blame science for this, because there's a lot of scientists who say, and we don't even need the scientific method anymore. We just know that it's not what we think it is, because it's more like this, which there's no evidence for. And this kind of stuff, this nonsense has got to stop. It's got to stop. You really are wearing the color shirt that you're wearing. Yeah, things are what they seem to be.
It's like what Trent Doherty said in his debate with T-Jump on Capturing Christianity, I think it was. T-Jump said something like, well, things aren't always as they seem. And Trent Doherty says, you're right, they're not always, but they usually are.
Yeah, more often than not, they're exactly what they seem like.
All right,
just because some things aren't doesn't mean that all things aren't. You can't just use that as I don't want to concede that, so I'm going to say things aren't always what they seem. It's stupid.
All right, so now this one's a little bit of a lengthier clip.
Well, that was an interesting rant. So the idea that things aren't always what they seem. Well, I mean, of course, they sometimes are and they sometimes aren't. That's, you know, not really in dispute here. The question is, when are they as they seem, and how do we know when they are as they seem and when they're not, and how often in general are they as they seem? So, I mean, this wasn't really justified, and, you know, okay, it was a fairly short clip, but yeah, I mean, that tone and attitude is frustrating to me, to be honest. Again, because if we're truth seekers, do we come to it with that attitude? I mean, obviously, you know, he's had his discussions and something's rubbing against him. But why should I be compelled by, you know, as an atheist, naturalist in particular, by comments like that, to just accept that, you know, the color of a t-shirt is what it is? I mean, if you actually break that down, it's not even clear what that means. Like, color is a perception. It doesn't exist outside of a human perceiving color. Yeah, sure, the shirt emits but not emits. It reflects light of particular wavelengths, but that's not the same as color. So even there, just that particular example, it's sort of unclear if that's even true. Like, independently of humans, is the shirt black? Well, it depends what you mean. And I would say in a meaningful sense, it's not, because color is a perception. It's not a mind-independent fact about reality. Now, the wavelengths that are reflected by the shirt are, to be sure, but that's not the same as color. And that's something we had to discover using science. Most things that we think about the world, such that solid objects are mostly solid, that time and space are sort of immutable and fixed, and that objects naturally fall downwards when you let them go, that objects will need a force to apply to them or an impetus to continue traveling in the same direction. All of these sorts of intuitive things are actually false, and we've discovered that through science. And it's sort of, I think, the norm actually in scientific investigation to find that our naive intuitions about things, from physics through biology, even through in the social sciences and folk psychology and so forth, are actually, if not totally wrong, at least significantly misguided or limited. And again, this doesn't mean that absolutely everything should be thrown out, but we should be very skeptical about these sort of intuitions about things. And this idea that we can just rely on a naive realism, that the way things are seem to be to us, well, that's just the way it is, I think is extremely hard to defend philosophically. And I'd be interested in hearing what a defense for naive realism in this sense that was being expressed there would actually look like, and why should we accept it? Historically, that is, going back thousands of years, humans believed that most things, from other animals to rocks and the weather and water and other things, were all animated by spirits that determined when these things happened, when you had storms and when the weather changed and things like that. And that was what determined these sorts of events. But we now know that that's sorry about that. We now know that that is not the case. And, well, presumably most of us know that that's not the case. And we live in a world that's governed by, physical laws. So we have these, humans have this intuitive sense of agency in a lot of things and patterns, and where there isn't any, or when the patterns are just due to chance. So I don't accept this naive realism. And my question would be, why should I accept it? And what justification can be given for just sort of accepting that things are the way they appear, when it seems that we have a lot of reason for thinking that that's not the case. And that's going to be relevant for things like the notion that there's an immaterial self, or that we have libertarian free will, and some of the other sorts of things that that these guys want to talk about.
And that'll annoy Jonathan. But this one is from the video that was banned from YouTube from our channel, because I used clips from Joe Rogan. So
yeah, I don't care about this.
Want to do, all that we
so this is Sean Carroll here.
Meaning and purpose.
Oh yeah, so he's talking about meaning in life.
Hard and carefully, hopefully, about,
I think I'm probably going to skip that as well, because I just want to hear a little bit about morality, and then we'll finish up, because I do have to run it a little bit. But I do have to run a little bit, but I just wanted to make a few quick responses to this. So we'll finish out with this one, I think. So this is Matt Dillahunty talking about morality. And I mean, it seems that he's some sort of subjectivist or relativist. I'm not entirely sure, because he's saying in this talk that, or in this section, that morality is sort of relative to whether you care about other people. Like, if you care about others' well-being, then, it's morally wrong to hurt them and things like that. So that's some sort of a, I don't know if it's relativist exactly, or if it's like a hypothetical imperative. It doesn't really matter from my perspective, because I'm not actually that interested in what he has to say. I'm interested in what Braxton says in response. Let's just jump forward here. Hold on. Okay.
Next clip. Let me just explain Dillahunty's perspective here as best I understand it. And if I'm wrong about this, Matt, and you see this, please forgive me, but I think this is right. His perspective is that there's nothing so it's like a game of chess, like we talked about a while ago. I use that all the time for this. The game of chess is a game created by mankind with a subjectively chosen goal. The subjectively chosen goal of the game of chess is to checkmate the opponent's king or whatever, right? That's the subjectively chosen. Like, there's nothing in the universe that says anything about that. We just made that up. We subjectively chose that. But once that's the goal, and once you assign the properties to the different or the moves that are possible to the different pieces, then there is an objectively better or worse way to get to that subjectively chosen goal of playing chess. In a similar way, this morality that we're talking about here on Dillahunty's view is like, here's a bubble of people here, and the people inside that bubble think a certain way. They've subjectively chosen for something like well-being to be, that's like the checkmate. That's their subjectively chosen goal of their morality. Now, once that's the subjectively chosen goal, there's nothing in the universe says that's a good thing. Good has no meaning outside of the bubble. But once you've decided that's what we're calling good, then there are objectively better or worse ways to get there. That's not objective morality. That's still subjective morality. It's just within that subjective morality, there's objectively better or worse ways to get to the thing in your opinion one should do. Now, outside of that bubble over here, there's another bubble, and this one has in it, let's say, Christian morality. That's got a lot of the same things, right? There's overlap. But there's other stuff over here. Over here, there's another bubble, and only one person's in that bubble, and he happens to be the local psychopath.
Yeah.
And he doesn't care anything about what's in either of those bubbles. What you can't do if you're in Dillahunty's bubble is say that the people in those other bubbles should care about what you think in your bubble. Those things, there's no meta ethic here. There's nothing outside of your bubble that now everyone should care about that. Once you're outside of your bubble and you speak to other people's bubbles, you can't even say that what they're doing is bad. All you can say is, outside of your bubble, I don't like what they do.
Right.
I don't like it. I don't prefer it. And they would say that about you. They think bashing people's heads in with a ball peen hammer is what they prefer to do. And you can't tell them that's bad. You can just say the people in my bubble think that's bad. So that's kind of how that works. And so here in this debate with David Wood.
So I don't agree with this. No, I mean, I'm a moral realist myself, but put that to the side for the moment. What difference does it make what you can say to a person? I've never understood this objection that typically theists or apologists make that, well, you can't tell them it's bad. I mean, you can say to someone whatever you like, right? You could say that that's wrong. And by that, you just mean, well, you know, I subjectively dislike this, or I think it's not conducive to human flourishing or whatever. Like, you can say whatever, and then you're just interpreting what that means through your meta ethic. But why are we interested in a meta ethic based on what it justifies you of saying? Like, what difference does that make? Is the psychopath going to be any more convinced by a Christian meta ethic than any other type of meta ethic? I mean, is it persuasive power that determines what is most like the best meta ethic? That seems to be an odd criteria here. So this notion that, well, there's a problem with Matt Dillahunty's meta ethic because you can't say to another person outside of, like, who disagrees with you that, you know, what they're doing is really wrong. Why is that an objection? Like, well, so you can't say it. So what? Like, what difference does that make? Is it because you're not going to persuade them? But I'm not sure that Braxton's meta ethic would persuade them either. So that doesn't actually seem a relevant objection. So my question here is, what relevance is that? What can you say to them objection? I just don't understand what the point of that is to say. But maybe we should just focus on who's got the better theory of meta ethics rather than like what you can say to a hypothetical person who doesn't agree with you.
This gets teased out just a bit, but watch how at first Dillahunty doesn't quite want to say that.
Obligation for someone who says,
yeah, I'm not really interested in what Matt Dillahunty has to say here.
You see there, once you understand what it is exactly that Dillahunty's, how he views this thing, the universe doesn't care about chess is basically what we're saying. It doesn't care about chess. But if you're a person who's playing chess and you agree to the rules of chess and you care about getting a checkmate on your opponent, well then, okay, you should do this. But that gives you no meta ethic. You can't speak outside of that. And what we saw at the beginning of that clip was an attempt to offload onto everyone else. Now, what Dillahunty will say about that many times is everyone does care about well-being.
Yeah, he argues like William Lane Craig.
Right.
We all know that torturing little babies for the fun of it is wrong. Deep down, y'all know it.
The difference is deep down, everyone does know that. Deep down, everyone doesn't care. Deep down, everyone doesn't care about well-being like Matt Dillahunty thinks.
Right.
And that's why the Christian ethic here, I think, is.
But William Lane Craig says deep down, you know that certain things are morally, objectively wrong. And that's a lot more relatable than what Dillahunty's trying to sell here, that deep down everyone, no, we look at it out into the world. And
so it's interesting that this view seems to be saying that everyone knows what's wrong, but not everyone cares. That's actually a particular view in metaethics, which is a rejection of something that's sometimes called moral internalism, which is the idea that if you know that something is wrong, you'll be necessarily motivated to act in accordance with that, or at least have some degree of a motivation. Some people say you necessarily have an overriding motivation, but that's a separate point. This is related to, but distinct from, something called the Humean theory of motivation, which says that belief by itself is never sufficient to motivate you to take action, that you need also some sort of desire that conjoins with that belief. Now, I mean, I agree with both of those positions. I'm a moral externalist, and I agree with the Humean theory of motivation. I've discussed that in previous videos. The point, though, is that those are positions that need some defense, right? You can't just really assume those and then assert them like this, which is being done here, not when we're having a discussion of precisely about metaethics. But okay, let's take those positions. Then let's consider, well, what sources can one appeal to for giving people moral motivation, for example, or a reason for acting morally? And we could discuss whether a theistic metaethic provides better such reasons than a non-theistic metaethic. And personally, I think that it does, because the only additional resource that theists have is the existence of God or his commandments or something. And it's not actually clear to me how that provides better reasons for us to act morally, unless we're just going to ground morality in selfishness, like, well, you get a better deal in the afterlife, which seems to be actually what William Lane Craig says in some of his writings, and discussed this in some of the videos that I've discussed this in, which to me is actually not a very good grounding of morality. That's just a grounding of prudential rationality, not morality. But anyway, that's a discussion to be had. I guess the question that I would ask Braxton here is, again, what assumptions or positions is he taking in metaethics? How does he ground his metaethic, including the nature of moral facts and moral duties, if he thinks those are real, which I think he does, and moral motivations. And then what is it exactly about a naturalistic meta-ethic, of which there are many, by the way, that is lacking, rather than just sort of these strange hypotheticals about like, well, what could you say to someone who would disagree with you? Which, like, you can say that about literally any position. Well, what about someone who doesn't agree with you? What do you say then? How is that relevant for assessing whether it's the view you hold is true or not? So that's my question to Braxton. What exactly do you hold about these positions, and why do you think that? And then how do you compare that to the various naturalistic or atheist positions and evaluate those? Let's have a discussion about this where we get into some of the details here and move beside these sort of vague, irrelevant hypotheticals here.
And even if secular humanism was an ideal system of morality, not everyone wants it. And I'm not saying because they're not secular humanists, I'm saying...
Well, not everyone wants theism either. How is that different? Again, what does it matter what people want? What does that have to do with anything? I don't understand the relevance.
It's obvious when you look around at the world as it is, that no, deep down, they don't care about the well-being of others. In fact, a lot of people...
So does believing in God just make you care about the well-being of others? Actually, maybe it does. Like, maybe that's a appeal to a Christian theology, that when you accept Jesus, you start caring about the well-being of others. Maybe that's some sort of change that God makes in us. That might be a claim that you could make, but then we could debate that, and is that empirically true? I sort of question that. And we could go from there, but the point is, I can't really work out what he's claiming about the relationship between what the theism is supposed to be doing here, because it seems like all of these things that he's raising, I could just substitute, naturalism, or substitute out naturalism or humanism for theism or Christianity, and you could say the exact same thing. So again, I want to ask, what's the relevance of these points here?
People on this planet that we share oxygen with don't care about your well-being; they care about their own. So
yeah,
that's what I know deep down, because I also recognize that we live in a fallen cosmos.
So there we go. If you accept, or let's say unbelievers say the darndest things, these are some of the things that might shake out if you're an atheist, particularly if you're an atheist naturalist.
Yeah.
The self doesn't exist. Rocks are atheists, as well as babies. Free will is one of the most important things about being a human, and yet it's just pretend.
You don't remember where that's from, do you?
Yeah, it's my debate with Joe Myra.
That's right.
Free will is an illusion. Come up with our own meaning. There's no ultimate meaning. And morality is just playing a subjectively chosen game. And Dillahunty can't even say, you shouldn't suffocate me.
Yeah.
And that's my mind. When you're up there saying, if you don't care about my well-being, there's nothing that says you're not to suffocate me. That's where we're starting to see some livability problems develop.
Right.
And so atheists say the darndest things, guys.
Yeah. You don't exist. Free will is an illusion, meaning you don't have a purpose. Great. It's heartwarming.
And that's why I said at the beginning of the show, like on its face, at first, atheism doesn't seem like, okay, well, I'm just saying God doesn't exist, or I don't have a reason to believe that God exists. And so here's why that is. Why isn't he more obvious? Why evil in the world? Why? And, we can talk about those things. We have shows on all those things. But the point is, that's one thing. But when you take atheism, and it's not just on its face anymore, but you subtract theism from a worldview and you supplant it with atheism, or if you're a lack of belief person, whatever, however you frame that up, these are the things that shake out. And that is a very bizarre worldview that takes away everything, most of what's meaningful to you out of life, and doesn't match what you deep down know to be true.
And you don't live consistent with it anyway. Because take Alex Rosenberg, for example.
Yeah, I think that gives you the picture they sort of go a little bit on. So Christians like Braxton say the darndest things, right? They say that because a few people on the internet, like Matt Dillahunty and Sean Carroll, have, I would say, somewhat odd or unclear views about some of these matters. I mean, I'm not really interested in specifically what they say, but sure, there's some things you can find where it's like, I'm not sure I agree with that, or that doesn't seem very well justified. But because these atheists say these things, that therefore this is what like shakes out when you have an atheist worldview, because that's what he was saying there. He was making a direct link between these sorts of views, and that's what happens when you adopt atheism, more specifically naturalism. And that's a pretty strange thing to say, right? Because what you'd actually want to see is, does atheism or naturalism force you into those views? What other alternatives are there available to the naturalists or atheists to understand things like free will or morality or continuity of self over time? The three main points that I've talked about. There are a couple of others in the video that I haven't addressed here, but that would be the way to do it. Let's have a discussion looking at the options available, looking at comparing meta-ethics, comparing theories of persistence of self, and comparing notions of I've already forgotten what the other one was. Oh yeah, free will, and see who has the better account, what evidence and arguments stand with respect to both sides, and exactly what Braxton appeals to with respect to theism that is unavailable to the naturalist, and see how much of a difference that makes in terms of giving the giving answers to these questions. And I would contend that actually I don't think that theists do have access to really any significantly greater explanatory power in their worldview than the naturalist does. They have just, in my opinion, extra baggage in their worldview with extra things that they've inserted there that don't sort of fulfill their explanatory hold what's the word I'm looking for? Pull their explanatory weight in your worldview, and so I think they're unjustified. So I think that free will is real. I think I hold to a compatibilist theory of free will. I'm a moral realist. I hold to a form of reductive naturalism relating to Peter Railton's views about idealized preference satisfaction for those who are interested. And I tend towards a per-Durantist theory of self, where a person, like many complex objects, are four-dimensional entities that have temporal parts. I'm just breezing over these to just give you a sense of what I believe. Of course, there are atheists who believe lots of different things. There's a lot of discussion in the literature here. So my invitation to Braxton is, let's have a discussion about this. I'll come on your show, you come on my show, whatever you want to do. Or other theists who might be interested in talking about this. Let's nut out these issues. Let's see where the arguments stack up and what views are open to different people. But let's not have this sort of nonsense about, this is what shakes out when you're an atheist and they just can't explain these different things, and it just all falls apart and you have to believe that, you don't exist and all this other stuff. No, you don't have to believe that. Philosophers debate this. There's a lot of discussion. Most philosophers, in fact, are naturalists, and they still, debate all of these topics. There's many views available, many different explanatory resources. That's where the discussion is at. And so when, people like Braxton say these sorts of things, it's frustrating to me. It seems like it's almost a willful misunderstanding or characterization of atheists. Sure, you might be able to find some atheists who believe the things that Braxton is saying, but that doesn't mean that it falls out from the worldview in the way that he's saying that it is. So, when I watch this video, I just think, wow, Braxton and some Christians like him, they just say the darndest things, and it's a bit hard to understand. And it doesn't seem to me a very good faith attempt to understand naturalism as a worldview or a rigorous engagement with the philosophical questions that he raises. So that's really all I had to say. Have a look at some of my other videos and my videos on Digital Gnosis' channel with the Bad Apologetics series, where we discuss some of these in more detail, including some of Braxton's videos. And thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully this was sort of interesting to see as a sort of counterpoint my reaction to what he said. And yeah, thanks for coming. Talk to you next time. Bye.